All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started on the webinar today. I am Marnese Jackson, and I am the co-director at the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. Today, we're going to do a high-level concept of ecofeminism and ecowomanism. Now, I know a lot of us may have heard of feminism some way, some form, or may identify as a feminist, but we're going to expand on the terminology so we can just get introduced to new concepts, and this is just going to be a high level. We will revisit this in the winter, spring for Women History Month. So if you're interested in being a part of that webinar, if you identify as a feminist or womanist, please let me know. And so please put your name, your organization in the chat to let me know where you're coming from. So today's agenda, we'll do some introductions, expectations. Since we're on webinar, we don't really have much expectations. We just want you to be present, and we're glad you're here. And if you're interested in speaking about your story as a feminist or womanist or your experience, please let me know. We can bring you up to the front of the webinar, okay? So everyone can see you. We'll talk about what is feminism, what is womanism, what is the difference between both of them, and then we're going to examine some privileges of white feminism, because it's a spectrum. There's all types of feminism: Black, white, Latinx, indigenous, but feminist is just like really the term that we all can identify with, regardless if you don't identify as a feminist, okay? They'll talk about intersectionality. What is ecofeminist, ecowomanism? We're all in here together because of I'm presuming that we're here together because we're doing the work for climate justice and environmental justice. And so we'll expand a little bit on that. And there's some problems and solutions with the movements with feminism and how we can move forward. Okay, and so just a reminder, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube page, Facebook, and of course you can have access to this. So I am Marnese Jackson, one of the co-directors at the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. Jacob Surflin is our other co-director. He manages our building technology and policy. He's in Des Moines, Iowa. Maggie, I believe you're on. If you want to just speak, that's great.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Marnese. My name is Maggie Heiser. I'm the communications manager based out of Columbus, Ohio, and I'll just be here on the back end. So if you have any issues, need some links or anything like that, feel free to shoot me a message. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. Okay. And so I am going to just for those who are new, the Midwest Building Decarbonization started back in 2022, develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector. That means homes and buildings by 2050. And our priority states are Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, Missouri, Indiana, and Iowa. We have national and regional partners. And so for today's objectives, we will just get a basic understanding of what ecofeminism and ecowomanism ideologies are, and to get an understanding of the importance of intersectionality, privilege, and how it shows up in our environmental and climate justice movement in regards to women, right? So, icebreaker, since this is Black August, and we traditionally celebrate all the revolutionaries that were born in August or events that happened in August with Black Americans, men and female. But today we're going to focus on Black activists. Who is your favorite? We're going to actually expand on that. Who is your favorite Black woman activist? Okay, so for me, that is Assata Shakur. She is a Black Panther. She is still living in Cuba. She can't come back to the US because they won't let her. And she is a Black Panther, and she got accused of killing two, I believe it was state police officers in the 70s. But medical and evidence proved that she could have committed the crime, and she Somehow she escaped to Cuba. So she is still there, but she is one of my favorite leaders in the movement, because she also does work in food justice. And she really helped me to understand what enslavement was really about. Of course, it was about capitalism, outside of course, racism, but I really do like her. So in the chat, if you would like to put your favorite Black woman activist, that would be awesome. And Maggie, if you want to participate, you can come off mute.
Thanks, Marnese. I was gonna say, I'm not sure, I guess maybe activism in a bit of a different way, but I read a lot of Bell Hooks's work in college and just loved her. Like a lot of her writing really kind of changed my perception on just like life in general. So she's always stuck with me, and I revisit her writing quite often.
So yes, Bell Hooks is definitely an activist, and she is also a feminist. And Bagari Matai is an African. Yes, we are definitely gonna lift her up in EcoWomanism. Leah Thomas, Angela Davis. We really don't go wrong with Angela Davis. Yes, let's keep them coming. Leah Thomas, Wangari, and Bell Hooks. Yes, these are some really good women who have done a lot of great things for our community. So let's go ahead and get started. So the characteristics of a feminist in the chat. One word, Sojourner Truth. Yes, one word. When you think of a feminist, what do you think is one characteristic you think of? When you guys all, I'll give you guys all a minute. Strong, bold, tough, doesn't back down. Determined. I see that a lot. Leader, matriarchal leadership, collaborative. Okay, so these are great answers, and let's keep them coming, okay? So feminism is a range of social political movements and ideologies that aim to define and establish the political, economic, personal, and social equality of the sexes. Feminism holds the position that societies prioritize the male point of view and that women are treated unjustly in these societies. Efforts to change this include fighting against gender stereotypes and improving educational, professional, and interpersonal opportunities and outcomes for women. Although feminist advocacy is and has been mainly focused on women's rights, some feminists argue for the inclusion of men's liberation within its aims because they believe that men are also harmed by traditional gender roles. I tend to agree with that. Feminist theory, which emerged from the feminist movements, aims to understand the nature of gender inequality by examining women's social roles and lived experiences. Feminist theorists have developed theories in a variety of disciplines in order to respond to issues concerning gender. So there were 5 waves of feminism. And I would say we actually still have, we may have a 7th wave if we're going to include a 6th wave if we're going to include modern feminism today. But we're just going to focus on those 5 main ones. And so I wanted to show everyone a picture of what feminism is and what it looked like, right? And for me, this looked like a white woman, because the movement got started initially with white women in Europe, and of course it moved across the United States of America. And so this is a picture of a feminist back in the day in a news article. But in the first wave of feminism was a period of actively during the 19th and early 20th centuries in the United States and the United Kingdom. it focused on the promotion of equal contract, marriage, parenting, and property rights for women. And so the second wave of feminism in the United States came as a delayed reaction against the renewed of women after World War II. And so, I mean, a lot of us have probably studied a lot of history, but women, you know, while the men were at war, women stayed home and worked, right? And so in the late 1940s, post the war boom, which was an era characterized by an unprecedented economic growth, a baby boom, move of family-oriented suburbs and ideal to have ideal marriages. And so during this time, women did not tend to seek employment due to their engagement with domestic and household duties, which we all know can seem as a gender role, which was seen as a duty, but often left them isolated within the homes, estranged from politics and participating in that process, economics and lawmaking. So they weren't able to be a part of the political process and or have their own money at the end of the day. And so this life was clearly illustrated by the media, for example, on TV shows. One example that's coming to mind is Leave It to Beaver. If you were growing up in the back in the day, I grew up in the 80s. That was one of my favorite shows, Leave It to Beaver. And we know Joan Cleaver, she was a housewife, which was ideally what a lot of women did back in the day. And so within the second wave of feminism, it was a period of, feminist activity that began like between the early 1960s and which lasted into the third wave of feminism beginning in the 1990s. And so with the first wave of feminism, just to go back, it focused mainly on the suffrage movement, overturning legal obstacles to gender equality, such as voting, property rights. And within the second wave of feminism, it broadened what does the broader range of family look like in regards to domestic, sexuality, family, the workplace, reproductive rights. And so with the second wave of feminism, it drew attention to issues of domestic violence, marital rape, which they were able to create rape crisis centers, women's shelters, and brought about changes in custody laws and divorce laws. And so women were able to own bookstores, credit unions, restaurants, and meeting places, which helped them grow economically. Okay, so thank you for the question. I will not be lifting up the Barbie movie because I did not see the Barbie movie. I have heard things though. So intersectionality, which brings in people of color, right? Which was missing from the typical narrative during the second wave of feminism, which really honed in on the experiences of Black and other women of color, as well as working class women, as some narratives focus on sexism encountered by white, middle, and upper class women. Some narratives present a view focusing on this event in the United States, which neglected the work of white anti-racist feminism. So Kimberly Crenshaw, she coined the term intersectionality in 1989 after the end of the second wave of feminism, which really focused on Black and women of color writings, which we don't live one issue lives, that we live multiple issues, which included race. And it was really highlighted within political activities in the 1970s. So intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how a person's various social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. And so intersectionality identifies multiple factors of advantages and disadvantages. For example, these can include gender, caste, sex, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, religion, disability, weight, and physical appearance. And these intersecting and overlapping social identities may be both empowering or oppressive. And so the first and second wave of feminism, which largely focus on the experience of white middle class women, to include the different experiences that didn't include the different experiences of women of color, poor women, immigrant women, and other groups. And so intersectional feminism aims to separate itself from white feminism by acknowledging women's differing experiences and identities. So in this framework, for instance, discrimination against Black women cannot be examined as a simple combination of misogyny and racism, but as something more complicated. And intersectionality engages in similar themes of triple oppression, which is the oppression associated with being poor or immigrant, woman of color, and intersectional analyst aligns very closely with anarcho-feminist power analysis frameworks. So Audre Lorde is one of my other favorite activists and feminists. There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issues lives. And so within the third wave of feminism, it traced to the emergence of the riot girl feminist punk subculture in Olympia, Washington in the early 1990s. It lifted up Anita Hill's televised testimony in 1991, where she was sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas, and he was nominated, of course, sits on the Supreme Court of the United States, where he sexually harassed her, which lifted up women being nationally harassed in the United States of America by high-ranking positions. So within the fourth wave of feminism, it opposed the extinction of the third wave of feminism, which corresponds to a resurgence in interest in feminism beginning around 2012. And so with this fourth wave of feminism, it is defined by many but one, Kyra Cochran, she characterizes as defined by technology. So you see a lot of women doing a lot of engagement on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, to challenge misogyny. And as we know, this has been an emergence of a lot of misogynistic men across the United States and globally. And it has really resurfaced, which women have really experienced a lot of backlash with reproductive rights, health, and then it's also lifting up what does it look like to be a feminist with other gender identities such as trans women and other members of the LGBTQIA community. So it has really expanded on what does feminism look like within this fourth wave of feminism. So yes, within this fourth wave of feminism, it has also included focusing on workplace harassment, campus sexual assault, which a lot of activists has called this rape culture and street culture, which means cattle calling, how men respond to women in the streets. And unfortunately, on the flip side of that, we have a lot of men really attacking women on what we wear, how we dress, how we speak, what leadership roles we should take. So in my personal opinion, I do still think the feminist movement is still needed. Because the resurfacing of a lot of misogynistic viewpoints is really prevalent right now in the United States through our laws, through social media, and everybody are social media warriors. But you know, men are still in charge with making these laws. So just FYI. So with the post-feminism movement, believe that women have achieved the second wave goals while being critical of the third and fourth wave feminist goals. And so the third term was first used to describe a backlash against second wave feminism, but it is not a label for a wide range of theories that take critical approaches to previous feminist ideologies. And so some feminists feel that we have achieved gender equality, that we are able to voice our concerns. We can get a divorce if we want to. We can file for alimony. We are able to participate in the political process. However, some feel that we are still struggling with all these equality issues. So in the chats, I want to know, what do you all feel that we are with the feminist movement in regards to, are we progressing, or are we moving backwards? What do you all think? Now I'm going to get some water real quick. Okay. Definitely regressing. Okay. Progressing as it relates to visibility, but still regressing, especially for minorities. Moving backwards, a lot of women in the United States do not have reproductive rights. Yes. I think mainstream feminist movement has suffered from a shaky foundation that was based on exclusion, particularly regarding Black civil rights movements. And so I think it's hard to move forward if we don't address those now. Definitely, Emily. Okay, so just an example of a particular type of feminism, indigenous feminism. We, refer to our indigenous brothers and sisters as First Peoples. So I just really wanted to start there, even though I identify as Black and Indigenous, but I'm Black presenting, of course, but I am a Black woman. Indigenous feminism is an intersectional theory and practice of feminism that focus on decolonization, Indigenous sovereignty, and human rights for Indigenous women and their families. For example, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, crisis, forced sterilization of Indigenous women, the struggle for land rights, and the disproportionate sexual victimization of Native American women by white men. And you can see this on fracking camps, pipeline camps, where women, Indigenous women, do come up missing because of these fracking camps, and they are prone to sexual violence, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, sexual trafficking, etc. And so Indigenous feminists are often reluctant to engage with Western mainstream feminist theory due to its failure to recognize the effects of the gender process of colonization on Indigenous women, as well as a historical pattern of white women not understanding or not being willing to be allies against the multiple oppressions faced by Indigenous women. Mainstream feminists usually assume that fighting oppression on the basis of sex or gender is the top or even sole priority, while Indigenous women is a secondary importance. So that's why intersectionality is important, because we don't live one issue lives as women of color. We have multiple issues, and our Indigenous brothers and sisters really lift that up. Okay, so I want to play this video for you all, and hopefully it starts right here. Hold on to that. It works.
Welcome back to our International Women's Day special. Our next topic, Indigenous feminism. Michaela Shannon is here to help us understand this intersectional theory and how gender and conceptions of gender influence the lives of Indigenous peoples historically and, of course, today. Michaela, welcome. First, can you explain Indigenous feminism from your perspective as an Indigenous woman?
Well, to understand how Indigenous feminism is different from the original white feminist movement, we must first understand the motives and battles behind white feminism. White feminism is a term used to describe the expressions of feminism, which are perceived to focus on the struggles of white women while failing to address the many distinct forms of oppression that ethnic minority women face and other women that are lacking privileges face as well. It is a fight for equality between man and woman under the patriarchy. Now, in Indigenous communities, women were not always thought of or treated as inferior. Women were the backbones of the community. Patriarchy and gender binary were and are products of colonialism. And we as Indigenous women imagine and understand what a balanced society looks like because it existed before. So to loosely define.
Oh, okay. Are you guys able to hear it? Okay, let me go back. Okay.
Indigenous feminism, it's an intersectional theory and practice of feminism that focuses on decolonization, Indigenous sovereignty, and human rights for Indigenous women and their families.
Any of us who exist in the intersections have always understood that our feminism is not necessarily like the first and the second waves of feminism that we all studied in school. Because I know for Black women, it was never about the fight to work. We've been working. That was very much a part of white feminism. And so there's so many different issues when you look at the intersections and the issues that we're dealing with in life. So talk to us some more about how Indigenous cultures maintained this gender balance, because it's something I feel like we can all learn from.
Yes, our Indigenous communities were balanced because we understood that the roles that man and women possessed were equally valuable to the livelihood of our communities and the livelihood of our land. Gender inequality exists today, and it is socially constructed. And we see it embedded in structures, all colonial institutions and structures, including educational systems, governance systems, workplace settings, and religion. And women today are still fighting in many parts of the world, including our home territory and home country, for basic human rights, for equality, for respect, for safety, and recognition. Patriarchy exists in our country now because of the forced adoption of Western government to maintain our sovereign status. So although there is that colonial thumbprint, there is optimism because there are diverse systems that we have memory of from before colonialism.
Yeah, there is a model that existed before colonialism. So what can we all do to uphold Indigenous feminism, Michaela?
Indigenous feminism requires us to not only fulfill our cultural roles, but also to correct and fix the cultural roles that have been twisted by colonialism and patriarchy. And it demands us to ask difficult questions and to have these difficult discussions and conversations. We need to restore our original identities and agreements between our communities and between ourselves and with the land. We need to prioritize issues that are of urgent crises in Indigenous communities, like the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic, forced sterilization of Indigenous women, the struggle for land rights, and the disproportionate sexualization of Indigenous women, specifically targeted by white men, and build from those matriarchal foundations. So imagine how much better this work would be when our Indigenous women, our matriarchs, have the autonomy, the agency, and the power once again. And not power over men or power over other people, but transformative power that comes from respect for self and equality with others.
I can imagine it. I can imagine it, and it looks really good. Michaela, thank you so much for helping us understand Indigenous feminism in a deeper way. So many layers there that we need to get through, so that was a great introduction.
Okay, so Okay. In the chat. And I can welcome somebody if you would like to answer this question live. How has feminism shaped your advocacy for climate and environmental justice? If you like to come up live, just put it in the chat and I can bring you up, okay? Or Maggie can bring you up. Because I love to hear your voices, and it's different presenting in webinar format. But we had some security issues and we're just trying to cut down on a lot of things. So if you're interested in giving your answer live, please put it in the chat. But for me, I don't identify as a feminist, but since it's just a general term, I think it has shaped me to look at everything as an intersectional view. That when I'm out talking about building decarbonization, for example, I'm always thinking about, okay, I'm a Black woman, I'm a single mom. I have experienced energy burden, energy insecurity on all levels economically. And then I'm also thinking from the historical perspective, like of families and what they have experienced. So lifting up that, economically, spiritually, as a mother, as a Black woman, because race, adds to that. I think I'm definitely going to lift up women. Not necessarily that I want to lift up men because I'm very holistic, but I'm going to definitely lift up women because we experience a lot more as far as food quality, reproductive, more do breast cancer, for example. We want to expand into breast cancer due to climate and environmental issues. So I just think we have more at stake than men do in regards to just living day to day. So if anybody like to, say their story, that would be awesome. Okay. If not, we'll move on. All right. So, Cheryl, thank you. Okay. We'll bring you up, Cheryl. All right. You are allowed to talk.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So I look at myself, I never labeled myself as a feminist. I just happened to be born in a household. I have 7 brothers. I'm the only girl. But my parents, I was born in the 50s. So I came into the 60s and the women's movement and all of that. And my mother and my aunts were probably like in their 40s, 50s at that time. And so they were wearing the natural and, got rid of the bra. And so these type of things for me were just like natural, everything that I was engaged in, I was raised to be like an independent thinker. You can do anything you want to do, aspire to do. I was never channeled into that leave it to beaver role. My mother did not teach me how to cook, but my brothers are like chefs. I learned from my dad and how my brothers did things. And then I came into work world when IT was just really opening up as a Black woman, rarity in all white situation. Didn't know anything about racism per se or male domination because in my house, I was an equal. And so my vision has always been to women are equal, everybody's equal. You can pursue your dreams. I never felt held back. And I also had to learn how to stand up when folks were trying to hold me back. So when I'm engaging in a lot of situations, I kind of feel like I stick out in a lot of situations I've been in because I was raised differently. And on the other side of that, Black women that I was engaging with in the sororities and things like that were kind of little standoffish in a negative way. I didn't have any issues, but because of what I accomplished and the things I was doing in the industries I was in, versus being an educator like most of them, that it was always underlying, ooh, she's different. But I don't live, I don't let that stop me. I'm open to everybody, friendly. But I felt like I was born this way, raised this way. So a lot of stuff was kind of like not on the forefront for me for a long time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much. Okay. Anybody else like to come up? Okay. I trust women will be more likely to work for change that benefits the whole community, but also know that white women have part of the problem prioritizing our own interests. All right. And then Eslin, thank you so much. When I go into spaces to advocate, I go knowing I have a voice, a role to play, power and agency. At times I have had to remind other women advocates that they have power and should not be afraid to exercise it and to push back when the patriarchy tries to bully them. Yeah. Okay. And so with womanism, okay, so I do identify as a womanist. Is a social theory based on the history and everyday experiences of Black women. The focus of the ideology is not on gender inequality, but race and class-based oppression. Womanism as a theory or movement for the survival of the Black race, a theory that takes into consideration the experiences of Black women, Black culture, Black men, spiritual life, and orality. And so, as a Black woman, and there has been a lot of controversy, especially with Black women, Black men as well, that Black women have really aligned with white women ideals, not knowing, well, not understanding that we experience the same sexual exploitation, not having access to reproductive health and or rights. At the time, we weren't even able to vote as Black women. We have experienced domestic violence, as well as not being able to get a divorce in those unhealthy situations. So it's not that Black women was like totally against just saying, hey, we're done with Black men. No, we're actually very family oriented and want to keep the Black family structure going. So that's a misconception that I have to educate a lot of just men on in general, that, hey, Black women really love the family structure. Unfortunately, a lot of us are single moms, and that's just, of course, the breakdown of the Black family structure due to white supremacy culture. But I'm going to play this video. It has Alice Walker, who helped us coin womanism, and I just love Alice Walker. And for those who haven't seen The Color Purple,
are you a feminist or a womanist? A question a lot of Black women will inevitably ask themselves while they're exploring feminism. Is womanism just feminism rebranded, or is there a little bit more to it than that? Well, in this video, I'll be explaining and exploring what is womanism. Womanism is a term coined by Alice Walker, who famously wrote the novel The Color Purple. The term first appeared in her book In Search of Our Mother's Garden, Womanist Prose, published in 1983. She created womanism to center Black women in a feminist movement that largely benefited middle-class white women. While Black women also benefited from the feminist movement, their contributions weren't acknowledged, and thus womanism was created. Because white women are often seen as the standard victims of sexism, feminism tends to be very white and rarely considers how Black women specifically deal with being Black and female. This often means Black women participating in larger feminist movements tend to feel as though they have to choose between fighting against racism or sexism. Often because of the erasure of Black women within the feminist movement, Black women participating in feminism sometimes feel like they have to fight against the racism among feminists who don't see the need to include critiques of white supremacy in their fight against gendered oppression. These feminists are referred to as white feminists, not necessarily because they're white, but because their feminism really only seeks to serve white women, while actively overlooking Black women. And that's been consistent through the history of feminism, where Black women were often asked to stand in the back of the line while white women asked for their rights first, and considered the goals of Black women to be antagonistic to their own. Alice Walker defines a womanist as a Black feminist or feminist of color, a woman who loves other women sexually or non-sexually, and sometimes individual men sexually or non-sexually. She is committed to the survival and wholeness of all people, male and female. She isn't a separatist, except periodically for her own health. She loves music, dance, the moon, the spirit, and loves love and food and roundness. She loves struggle, her people, and most of all, she loves herself. It's important to know that while womanism is about loving and appreciating Black women and critiquing the classist and racist aspects of white feminism, it's also about supporting and empowering Black men, who are often integral parts of a Black woman's life and family. When it comes to differentiating between womanism and feminism, Alice Walker says womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender, meaning that there are only slight differences between being a womanist and being a Black feminist. Womanists largely do support the larger feminist movement and their ultimate goals, but have carved out their own space to specifically center Black women, whereas Black feminists tend to do the same but seek to work within the existing feminist movement and structure. Well, I hope this video helps you understand a little bit more about womanism. If you'd like to continue to learn, share, and grow, you can keep watching some What Is videos by clicking right over here. And as per usual, don't forget to subscribe for more content.
And don't worry, everybody will get access to these slides, links to the videos, and all the great stuff. Don't worry. Okay, so privilege is a set of unearned benefits given to people who fit in a specific social group, just FYI. And basically, can you experience homophobia if you are heterosexual, or can you experience transphobia as a cisgender, cis meaning person who identifies as a gender assigned at birth? I am considered a woman, so that's what I identify as. You probably heard that term running around. Privilege is simply the opposite of oppression. So when I think about this in the context of when I think of the context of feminism, womanism, we have as feminists, especially white feminists, you all have a privilege of course, having white skin, to speak and to use your white skin as an ally to speak up for Black and brown women, not speak for us, but speak up for us when we are against patriarchy and all those other rights. That's what has been the criticism against the traditional feminist movement, that white women have left Indigenous and Black women in the dust, and did not look at all the things that we needed once you guys got the support of our communities. And so at a basic level, feminism is equality between the sexes. We must consider that, you know, is your gender the only part of your identity? It is not. You know, you have your class, you have your education level, you have your age, and you have so many other intersecting identities that we just cannot forget that all these are equally as important as our gender, right? Or as our sexuality, right? So we have to make it valid. We have to make a point to lift those up when we are in conversations, because like I said, we're getting hit left and right with the climate crisis, which impact our health. We know it impacts ourselves racial-wise, especially if you're a person of color. But then there's other things it impacts. It impacts our economics, right? It impacts our children, who we are the caregivers for. So as mentioned before, you know, womanism is the feminism as purple is to lavender. So, you know, it's just expanding on those two concepts. And so now that you learned about those two concepts in the chat, you know, how would you identify yourself now if you choose to identify yourself? I'm still going to identify myself as a womanist, a Black womanist. But of course I would have to explain what it is because that's not as popular as feminist. But I would say I'm a Black feminist and explain people need to be educated on womanism. So in the chat, do you identify as a womanist, feminist, or you just say, hey, I am me and I identify as me. I don't have to put myself in a box. And that's okay, you know, putting yourself in a box will have you limited, but you know. Okay, thanks so much. Thank you, Emily. You identify as both. Yes. Womanist. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Cheryl. And so, in another question I like to ask anyone, how does gender relate to environmental ethic, right? Like we're all environmental and climate justice advocates, activists, organizers, speakers, where we may sit, teachers, warriors, activists. So how does gender relate to this? And if anybody would like to come and speak up, just raise your hand and we can get into that conversation. But Eslyn says both. Whenever I discuss the plight of women, it always is centered in talking about the impact of Black women being both Black and woman. Yes. Indigenous humanists. Yes, Beatrice. Both. Okay. I think for me, gender relates to the environmental ethic is because we are on Mother Earth. And I believe that our natural resources like water, air, to me, I see those as not as a dominant or masculine thing. I see that as more of a feminine thing. And we do, as men and women, have both femininity and masculinity. So I would say for me, nature to me is a feminine concept or a thing. Yeah, let's see. When we're in our masculine, it helps us to be assertive and to show up and to like do the work. Feminine, it's more soft, right? And I like what Beatrice said, nature births life. Maggie said, I see so many aspects of my femininity and womanhood and environmentalism, care for healing for others. Yes. And I notice sometimes when I'm not in my femininity, is because I'm always working. But when I'm in my femininity, I'm always out in nature, right? I'm always like, I'm kayaking, I'm by some water, I'm playing in the dirt, right? Helping my mom garden, do her thing. So I'm more at peace. Like I'm not pounding the pavement of work. And that's to me more of the masculine. Okay. So ecofeminism is a branch of feminism and a political expansion on ecology. So ecofeminist thinkers draw on the concept of gender to analyze the relationships between humans and the natural world. The term was coined by the French writer, I can't say her name, but it's Frances. Yeah. But I'll make sure you have the information when I follow up. Ecofeminist theory asserts a feminist perspective of green politics that calls for an egalitarian collaborative society in which there is no one dominant group. Today, there are several branches of ecofeminism with varying approaches and analysis, including liberal ecofeminism, spiritual cultural ecofeminism, and socialist ecofeminism. And so these interpretations of ecofeminism and how it might be applied to the social thought include ecofeminist art, social justice, political philosophy, religion, contemporary feminism, and poetry. So it's not just one thing, right? And so feminist explores the connections between women and nature and culture, economy, religion, politics, literature, and it addresses the parallels between the oppression of nature and the oppression of women. And these parallels include, but are not limited to, seeing women and nature as property, seeing men as the reason why these culture and women as nature. And ecofeminist emphasizes that both men and nature must be respected. Yeah. Okay. So ecofeminism is an activist and academic movement that sees critical connections between domination of nature and exploitation of women. And so it started really big in the 1980s and the 1990s. Pay attention to those dates and what was happening. And among women from the anti-nuclear, environmental, and lesbian feminist movements, right? During those times, those are really, really big. And so with the Chipko movement, it was to save trees, a conservation of forests in India, rallying point for many future environmental movements all around the world. So it created a precedent for starting nonviolent protests in India, and played a major role in the global ecofeminist movement. Okay. And so with gender nature, several feminists make the distinction that it is not because women are female or feminine that they relate to nature, but because of their similar states of oppression by the same male dominant forces. And so with the marginalization is evident in the gender language used to describe nature and the animalized language used to describe women. And so people think the link between women specifically to the environment because they're a traditional social role as a nurturer and a giver. Kind of just said that a little bit, but I just think it kind of happens naturally. And so within this modern concept, a common claim with ecofeminist literature is that patriarchal structures justify their dominance through binary opposition, and these include heaven and earth, mind, body, male, female, human, animal, spirit, matter. And so oppression is reinforced by assuming that truth in these binaries are instilling them as marvelous to behold through religious and scientific constructs. And so ecofeminist theory asserts that capitalism reflects on only paternalistic and patriarchal values, which all are rooted in white supremacy culture. And so this notion implies that the effects of capitalism has not benefited women and has led to a hurtful split between nature and culture. And so going back into the 1970s, I remember ecofeminists discussed that the split only can be healed by the feminine instinct for nature and holistic knowledge of nature processes. So another example of ecofeminism is vegetarian ecofeminism, which asserts that omitting the oppression of animals from feminist and ecofeminist analysis is inconsistent with the activists of the foundations of both feminism and ecofeminism. And so a lot of ecofeminists believes that meat eating is a form of patriarchal domination that suggests a link between male violence and meat-based diet. Okay, just sharing the information. I'm not saying everybody should just stop eating meat today, but just sharing the information. So materialist ecofeminism is another common dimension of ecofeminism. So a materialistic view connects some institutions such as labor, power, and property as the source of domination over women and nature. And there are connections made between these two subjects of the values of production and reproduction. So ecofeminism as a whole challenge power hierarchies and in our movement, I know social justice, environmental climate justice movement, we like to make sure that we don't have top-down approaches to the work that we do. And so, of course, with ecofeminism, it challenged those hierarchies because we know the climate movement is also associated with patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism, which are all hierarchical frameworks. And so ecofeminism points out women's unique involvement in environmental damage. Women are hurt most by the exploitation of the earth because they are the most vulnerable in this patriarchal society. And spiritual ecofeminism is another branch of ecofeminism. It's a lot, and it is popular among ecofeminists, authors such as Starhawk and Rianne Esler. Starhawk calls this an earth-based spirituality, which recognizes that the earth is alive and that we are an interconnected community. And spiritual ecofeminism is not linked to one specific religion, but it is centered around values of caring, compassion, and nonviolence. And ecofeminists refer to more ancient traditions such as the worship of Gaia, the goddess of nature and spirituality, also known as Mother Earth. And some others study Wicca and paganism, are particularly influential in spiritual ecofeminism. So, question in the chat: what might be problematic about ecofeminism? For me, I am hearing just what I learned. A lot of it could be very theoretical, but nothing practical unless you are practicing having a spiritual connection with Earth. What do you all think? Clarity and vision. Okay. Thank you, Linda. I felt like it could put some people into a box of soft femininity and caretaking, which can be good sometimes, but rising up and being a tough, strong woman can be good too. Yeah, I can also expand on that too, Maggie. Being tough, strong, good women. When you're, for example, trying to find a mate, a lot of these mates don't like those strong women tough characteristics. They think it's emasculating. So just FYI, another look at it. I wonder if we can be more likely to do the work locally, but not take on a huge system. Okay. Okay. So some other critiques of ecofeminism. The feminist theory considers the roles of women played in these activisms to be the starter for ecofeminism in later centuries. According to Man Associates, the beginning of ecofeminism, not with feminists, but with women of different races and class backgrounds who made connections among gender, race, class, and environmental issues. This ideal is upheld through the notion that in activist and theory circles, marginalized groups must be included in the discussion. In early environmental and women movements, issues of varying races and classes were often separated. So those, that's one critique. Definitely we have heard that women of color and all these other oppressed, these intersecting identities were left out of the conversation. And ecofeminist believes that women and nature have strong bond because of their shared history of patriarchal oppression, whereas the socialist feminist focuses on gender roles in the political economy. the socialist feminists may oppose the ecofeminists by arguing that women do not have a connection with nature, rather that it is a socially constructive narrative. So I can see that. Yeah, and all these names just help us identify each other. Okay. So with EcoWomanism, let's speed through this. Okay. Environmental womanism looks at environmental issues and how they intersect with other systems of oppression. And eco-womanist lens look at how environmental issues disproportionately impact women, people of color, the lower class, and other marginalized groups. So Melanie Harris is a well-known author of eco-womanism. And I'm going to play this video where she talks to us about eco-womanism.
Ecowomanism is an approach to environmental ethics that really foregrounds the perspective, the genius, the ideas, the concepts, the religiosity and spirituality of women of African descent. And it is often in the environmental movement that we do not always include women of color and their voices, and particularly women of African descent, even though we have huge, huge models of ecological genius and certainly leaders in ecology throughout the world who are women of African descent. Nevertheless, one of the spaces in which in religion and ecology that really needed to grapple with this kind of intersection of race, class, gender, and beyond was really coming up with an approach that would allow all of us to think not just about environmental degradation and climate change, but also in relation to racial injustice and economic injustice. And so a frame that allows us to do that is eco-womanism. It's interesting, Mary Evelyn, that we started talking about Alice Walker, in fact, because as you know, my first book really was uncovering a lot of her nonfiction voice and recognizing so much of the social activism that she was a part of. She marched with King and so many others in the civil rights movement. But she was also one of the leading African-American voices in the environmental movement and went through a lot of kind of test and trial to be able to really signal that African-American communities and African-American people have just as much a right to be concerned about the planet as anyone else. Typically, and this is still the case today, one of the reasons why eco-womanism is so important is because an assumption and a myth is often construed that African Americans are always in tension and always fighting for racial justice and therefore don't, quote unquote, have time, unquote, to be engaged in environmental and justice work. And that's untrue. We see from Alice Walker, but we also see from a variety of different authors and historians that African-American history is particularly tied to the environment and particularly tied to ecological justice.
Okay, so an example of an eco-womanist is Wangari. I know you all put her in the chat. So in Kenya in 1977, the Green Belt movement was initiated by environmental and political activist Professor Wangari. It is a rural tree planting program led by women, which designed to help prevent desertification in the area. The program created a green belt of at least 1,000 trees around the villages and gave participants the ability to take charge in their communities. In later years, the Green Belt movement was an advocate for informing and empowering citizens through seminars for civic and environmental education, as well as holding national leaders accountable for their actions and instilling agency in citizens. The work of the Green Belt movement continues today And so eco-womanism is a crucial because the growing effects of climate change and toxic exposures continue to disproportionately impact marginalized communities. So how are women oppressed in ways that the earth has also been oppressed? In the chats, could you all give us some examples of how you can conceive the connections of ways women have been oppressed in the same way earth has been oppressed? All right, I see some answers coming. Okay, objectify, exploitation for financial gain. They both have been objectified and exploited by male-dominated system. Yes, physically abused, rights given, then taken away, misused, exploitation, unappreciated. Okay. These are some great answers. So how does race relate to the environmental ethic? Within the African-American communities, historically, both women and men carry vast amounts of agricultural knowledge within their beings. This is an important aspect of African-American environmental history and eco-womanism. So, you know, I really starting to like storytelling. And of course, I want to know more about, you know, who's in the room. But what is part of your Earth story or echo memory? Like, I spoke yesterday at the Mark conference, and I just think about how my parents always talked about conserving energy, turn off lights, but they also, you know, was talking about the economics of saving on your utility bill and things like that. But my folks first real echo memories when my parents used to take us camping in Mississippi, like in the 80s. And I just remember there being so many mosquitoes, but then there was also, of course, the Gulf of Mexico where we used to go down there and just swim in the Gulf. And it's just like really nasty now, but you know, we did it. So what do you remember about your first Earth story or echo memory? Okay. Making potions with grass and dirt outside. Yes. Thank you, Emily. Reading a book in a tree. Oh my goodness. In the grass. Love of ancestors for the soil and growing food. Okay. Yes, play in their long walks in the woods, nature, swimming in the springs in Florida, brother feeding me dirt. And we didn't die, right? Swimming, growing up as a farm girl, spending so much time outside taking care of chickens, barn, cats, gardens, etc. Gardening, making mud pies, outdoor camping in Canada. All right. So, you know, as we bring this all together, you know, if you have privilege, use it to elevate the voices of who don't. Listen to marginalized groups, even if they're criticizing a group you don't belong to. Don't be the girl who says, not all white women. Well, yeah, we know that. However, you do still have privilege. Remove transphobic language from your dialogue. A PUSSY is not a requirement for being a woman. And everybody have their viewpoints on trans women. However, just make sure that you're coming from a place of being a human and being respectful wherever people may be or how they identify. Okay, that's how we're going to all survive and move together. Because there's a lot of pitting against trans women and women that's going on right now. And we have to understand that we got to look at the bigger picture and the bigger objective of who we are fighting. And so doesn't mean we can't work together, right? Remove ableist language. Don't say something or someone's bipolar or retarded or insane. You have literally 1,000 other adjectives you can use, adjectives that you can use. So use one of those instead. So we have to watch our language and be mindful and just be okay with being corrected, right? And then most importantly, educate yourself, welcome diverse opinions. You know, when we're all informed, we'll do better. So yes, so what should you do now? Recognize your privilege that you have, become an ally, educate yourself on stuff like patriarchy and other oppressive structures. Do some soul searching on where you may be the oppressor, right? So that means you have to recognize your privilege. Do not speak over people, right? Their voices should be the loudest in the room. So if you a non-person of color, make sure that you step back and just listen. I have to say, Tanya Pulaski, she does well with navigating that as a white woman who's involved with our coalition. So I would say take some pointers from people who have been in this movement for a long time. And then also, you're not going to always get it right. Everybody don't get everything right. I don't get everything right. So two people or groups with different forms of oppression directed against them may both have legitimate needs. So, you know, conflict may happen with each other, but all conflict is not bad. Actually, it's good so you can get to a solution. And picking a way to reconcile the needs, it's really, really hard to get to. But we have to really be intentional on reconciling situations that has happened in our past. So as we mentioned around white feminism, has really hurt a lot of, and there's been a lot of hurt feelings in the past. And actually, you know, recently, you know, white women not showing up for us. Right those wrongs and just, you know, take those lessons and try to do the right thing. And, you know, as we do this work for climate justice, understand that women, we are out here fighting against these issues of climate change, which we have all identified our connection to Mother Earth. We're in the rooms where these conversations are happening, and you know, we have to show our power and speak up against power when it's the hardest and most intimidating thing to do. So I say organizations like We Can, Women's Earth, Climate Action Network are really leading at the forefront of bringing all women together. And of course, we all have space here within the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. And so, you know, centering our tribal communities, because that framework, which they really have a spiritual connectedness with Mother Earth, which can transform our environment. So, and Black Americans, we built the environment. So I think it's just really time to just really sit down on how we can consolidate these connections that we have in our relationships with Mother Earth. So with that being said, are there any questions before we get offline here? Don't worry, you will get access to the slides, the videos, the links. We'll probably send it out tomorrow. And if there's no questions, just remember that women are powerful and dangerous at the same time. That's why we keep getting oppressed. So So what are my thoughts on how to get more men to support? Oh Lord. So I wish I would have invited my boyfriend to this because he is you guys would think I would date somebody like me. He is on the total opposite end. Um, uh, I would say men who are really patriarchal, traditional, you have to have a high level of patience, but then also understand that they have a space too. And I know some men feminists, but of course they don't like to be called that because of the masculinity thing. So, a lot of men have ego, so we have to, manage that because they're fragile sometimes. But then men who, it may be, men who are raised by women, grandmothers, or who've been around a lot of women, really understand what it means to stand up for women. So I would say, continue to have those conversations with men about these issues. I've noticed when I was at that conference that, I knew I could not, the MAR conference, that I could not be emotional because I was in a room with a lot of white men and they wouldn't have got it, right? The emotion of a Black woman talking about energy burning and all that. I had to be just straight and concrete. And so it's kind of like also knowing your audience. Not to say that I should dim my light, but at that moment I knew I had to represent, especially being the first time I was in this audience. So I say come with the facts because we know men only like facts and not emotion a lot of times. So that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm learning from my boyfriend. So I try not to think with so emotion, like, hey, the fact of the matter is A, B, C, and D, to counter their argument. And then, you just got to sprinkle it in. Everybody can't take everything at one time. Okay. So just study. Whoever you're trying to talk to. Some book recommendations that I wanted to give you all though before we go. Womanist and Feminist Aesthetics, Womanist Fiction is a good one. Building Womanist Coalition, that is a very good one. Black Womanism in South Africa, Indigenous Feminism, Womanist and Margarista. Hey, look, can't talk, hey, but this is it. Hood Feminism, I am reading now, and that's a good one as well. And just FYI, coming up, we have our upcoming trainings for Midwest BDC. Next week, I'm doing implicit bias and decarbonization and white supremacy culture the last week in November. So let me see, hold on. Let's see. All right. And just educate, just sprinkle it in here and there because everybody can't take too much at one time. And lastly, here's a video that I wanted to show you all that I found on TikTok.
Instead of pouring billions into hugely destructive rocket launches that so far have been pretty unsuccessful, why not turn to tried and true solutions that have helped our species survive for hundreds of thousands of years? You've probably heard that exploring strange new worlds, seeking new life and civilizations, and boldly going where no man has gone before is the key to our current ecological crisis. But what if I told you the solutions to the climate crisis are found right here on Earth and not out there, as some would have us believe? EcoWomanism is the opposite solution to what the Elon Musk of the world are peddling. Just think about the knowledge about our planet that's locked in our ancestral ways of being. Deep knowledge about how our natural systems function and restore themselves. This sort of land-based wisdom is a science unto itself. EcoWomanism has mystical connections to African American, and Indigenous women ancestors. It also links a social justice agenda to environmental justice and recognizes that just as women of color have faced multiple forms of oppression, so has the Earth. Instead of abandoning our planet, EcoWomanism grounds us here and offers real-world solutions that aren't pulled from a science fiction movie. So, maybe it's time we start a new conversation that everyone is invited to. Practices contained within environmental justice and communities that encourage and reinforce their values for Earth justice with hope. Instead of
All right. Well, thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Can you share the chat?
I sure can. I think
Thank
I
you.
can.